Hey everybody, I'd like to talk about Star Trek and asymmetric warfare. This isn't a topic I've seen discussed, so let's discuss it. Let's have some fun. It should be an interesting discussion. I look around a lot for, people who are talking about spaceship designs, because I'm trying to shake up my spaceship design philosophy, and so I've been watching a lot, and some of these are Star Trek designs, and the people who talk about them always talk about them in terms of how well they do on the battlefield. And they talk about the Federation as having a standing army or navy, as needing military presence, and so on and so forth. And I mean, that's true, given how the Star Trek universe unfolded. But let's talk about how it began. How did the Star Trek universe begin? When did it begin? And where did it begin? It began in the shadow of Hiroshima. This was a big part of culture at the time. Hiroshima had been wiped off the map in 30 seconds by a tiny jet. The United States and the Soviet Union were butting heads over who would be better at wiping cities off the map with tiny jets. This is not an environment where battleships go up against battleships. If your battleships are going up against someone else's battleships, that means that one of you or both of you have already lost all of your planets and they've all been glassed, because that's how warfare works in this new era. And that was underlying all of the original series. You can see it if you watch them. Almost every single threat they come across is a metaphor for nukes. Whether it's a star exploding or plague or even just war, this is pre-apocalyptic. This isn't the good guys fighting the bad guys. This is everybody trying to stave off an apocalypse every episode. And sometimes there are bad guys, but they're usually just misguided or suicidal. They're not like, if we win, we are better off. It's more like, if we win, we die too. And we don't know that or we don't care. So every single one of these situations is everybody against the void. Everybody against the apocalypse. And that's where the utopian comes from. The utopian comes from the fact that if you don't work together, there won't be any kind of pia to go back to, whether it's utopia or dystopia. It's gone. And that really was a strong core. You can feel that underlying most of the conflicts in the original series. For example, you can even see it in their ship designs. The original Enterprise goes up against a planet, and it's like, the people of Rigel 9 are suffering from Zavurgian plague. And the Enterprise goes over there, and then, a warbird uncloaks. And the Klingons are like, we might be able to blow you up. We've got like 4-ton torpedoes and stuff and blasters and whatever else. We could probably blow you up. And the Enterprise is like, yeah, we could probably blow you up too. I mean, probably 50-50. And the Klingons are like, yeah, probably 50-50. And then through much deliberation, cooler heads prevail, and they go their own ways without causing a war. Why? Why does this 50-50 stalemate not cause a war with the notoriously warlike Klingons? Well, this is a Klingon battleship. This is a Coast Guard frigate. This ship, the original Enterprise, is intended to help people who are stranded in the depths of the sea of space. It's there to pull you out of trouble. It's not there to go to war. Despite that, it can go toe-to-toe with the enemy's battle cruisers. And that's a big deal. When you look at that, the threat isn't, can you fight off more of these? The threat is, if the Federation notices you and decides that you actually need to be stopped, what do you think they're going to do? Do you think they're going to build battleships? Because that wouldn't make any sense. They'll probably just blow up your sun. You've seen them blow up suns before. They'll probably just blow up your sun. And that is the threat hanging over all of the original series, and that is the reason why the Klingons always seem to back down at the end. It's not because they don't want to go to war. It's because the Federation will kill them. Sufficiently advanced science, in this case, it's so much more advanced than the Klingons. And that's the same sort of feel that you had back in the early 70s. It's exactly like this. There are some nations who still think that war will be fought by dudes with guns shooting at each other, by tanks rolling across battlefields. But the US is going, I mean, we could just nuke you. And that was hanging over the 70s and early 80s. And that was hanging over all of Star Trek. And that is the iron core beneath the utopia. Every single problem is a metaphor for atomic warfare. Every single problem is either everybody wins or everybody loses. And that's what made the original Star Trek feel so cooperative and so incredible and interesting. But over time, that faded. As we got further and further out of the Cold War, people stopped being so immersed in that mindset. And truth be told, the easiest kind of sci-fi to write is military sci-fi. And this is just sci-fi where the heroes prove their merit by fighting and winning. And it's extremely common and popular even today. It's also not really compatible with the idea of asymmetric warfare. Military sci-fi, any given encounter might be asymmetric, but it's not asymmetric like nukes versus tanks. It's asymmetric like a big tank versus a small tank. So this isn't really compatible with that idea, but it still took hold because this is easier to write. Like a lot easier. And so along came the Borg. And this is where Star Trek started to fall apart for me, because this is the point where you realize that they're not playing the same game that they used to play. They're not writing the same universe. They don't have the same iron core. Because if a Borg cube shows up above a Federation world in the original series, what do you think would happen? They would whip up a science device, and they would hit it with a hyperwave pulse of warped photons or something, and it would just go away. They would nuke it. That's it. Problem gone. And now that would be an interesting episode because it would focus on the fact that there would be a whole bunch of people like saying, we can't just nuke people. That's terrible. We can't just launch like hyper pulses. Once we start doing this, we're never going to get back our neutrality. We're going to, it's going to be an open threat again. That would be interesting. But that's how the episode would go. It wouldn't be, how do we defeat the Borg? It would be, okay, we know how to defeat the Borg. Are we going to go through with it? But instead, what happens? The Federation builds a fleet of warships, which are marginally more powerful than the Enterprise. They're marginally more powerful than the Coast Guard cutter. Okay. That makes no sense. But okay. Now what we have is a typical military sci-fi setting. And DS9 is a great example of that. It's largely a military sci-fi show. People like it a lot. People talk about how great it is. But it's not there for me. That iron core that kept the utopian part of Star Trek, it vanished. And the utopian part of Star Trek vanished with it. That's my opinion at any rate. You can see other sorts of series occasionally pluck at this idea of asymmetric warfare. And they're often the series that have the least public support, but the most fan support. For example, Firefly. Well, in Firefly, the asymmetric warfare isn't really nukes. It's more economic warfare or biological warfare, but you can still feel it. And all of the actions of the people are in regard to that asymmetric warfare. I wouldn't claim that it creates a utopia in Firefly, but it creates a very distinct setting because the people are dancing around this asymmetric warfare. And that makes it have a flavor that military sci-fi does not have. And I miss it. I miss sci-fi which wasn't about shooting aliens. Anyway, you can tell me what you think down below.